Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We're just waiting for another minute before we begin. So thank you.
Yeah, so we will begin in exactly 2 minutes time. Yeah, I can see we have a good quorum. Thank you, colleagues, for joining us this afternoon or morning or evening, depending on wherever you are. My names are Onesmus Leo Kalama, and I'll be moderating our Pandemic Fund 101 discussion this afternoon today. Where I am is actually afternoon. And I just want to thank colleagues who are actually supporting in this conversation today, from Stop AIDS, from the Pandemic Action Network, from ACT. Thank you very much for all of us having come together here today to actually shed more light on the Pandemic Fund 101, trying to respond or answer the many questions that people have had out there. What is it all about? Why and how should it be? These have really been questions that have been out there for many of us, trying to understand what the Pandemic Fund is all about for civil society and communities. So today we're going really to zero in, bringing in the basics of trying to understand what Pandemic Fund 101 is. And we really want to encourage all of us to have come into this conversation and discussion with an open mind. Let's ask all the questions that we have actually been asking out there to get all the clarity of all the questions and issues that we really had regarding the Pandemic Fund. And our very able speakers today and discussants will really try our level best to respond as succinctly as possible to the questions that will actually be posing in for us. So I just want to welcome all of us into this session and hope we all enjoy the conversation and discussion as we actually begin the year. I believe this is one of our first sessions that we're having for the year, and definitely as we are progressing forward in the year, we'll be having more conversation about the Pandemic Fund and other related topics. So I just want to take this opportunity and humbly welcome all of us to enjoy the discussion and the conversation that we are going to have this afternoon. At this moment, therefore, I really want to welcome my colleague Courtney to actually take us through Pandemic Fund 101 and as we move on into to the year. So over to you, Courtney. I hope you are already on board and set to take us through the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Onesmus. I'm actually standing in for Courtney this morning. She is under the weather, so you will get me instead to move through the slides. But thank you for your warm welcome and setting the scene for us for our discussion today.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Thank you so much. Take it over.
Thank you. Next slide. So this is our briefing agenda for our next hour. We've just had a warm welcome from Onesmus. We're going to run through the slides and leave as much time as we can for the question and answer period with my colleagues here helping to step in and answer any of the questions you'll have. Please, if you can utilize the chat as well and mute for the discussion until the Q&A period. Next slide, please, Nicole. So we're going to give you an overview of the Pandemic Fund and bring you through the timeline till today. So the Pandemic Fund finances a critical investment to strengthen pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response at the country, national, regional, and global levels. Focuses primarily on low and middle income countries and was designed to fill a gap and enhance coordination among partners and serve as a platform for advocacy. Next slide. So why was the fund needed? As I said, it was designed to fill critical gaps in the pandemic preparedness funding world. The IHRs, the International Health Regulations, and the Joint External Evaluations of the Global Health Security Agenda are all tools to assess country level readiness, but they did not come with associated funding to actually fill the gaps and provide the sustained financing that's needed. We also know that there's a critical cycle of panic and neglect with pandemics. And we know that in the absence of a pandemic, countries put this as a lower priority to invest in preparedness. Next slide. So to give you a little bit of an overview on the historical and current context, as I said earlier, the idea for a pandemic fund originated in March of 2020, and actually a little bit before. This is a grand challenges to address global health security and to catalyze additional sustainable financing to close the gaps at the country level. It was really, as we know, moved along because of the COVID-19 pandemic and was championed not only in the US, but by the G20 and the Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response. Next slide, please. So a brief timeline of the progress. In late 2021, the G20 leaders established the Joint Health and Finance Task Review to review a proposal and recommend next steps to establish a new fund for global health security and pandemic preparedness. April of 22, the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors reached a consensus to establish a new fund as a financial intermediary fund, or a FIF, at the World Bank. In June of 22, there's a feedback to a white paper that was released by the World Bank. And the name of that paper was a proposed financial intermediary fund for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, hosted by the World Bank. And in June of 22, the World Bank Executive Board approves a new fund for PPR that would serve as a way to establish and finance critical investments to strengthen PPR at the national, regional, and global levels. Next slide, please. Of September of last year, the first meeting of the Pandemic Fund Governing Board met, and that includes 2 voting members plus 2 alternates from civil society organizations. In October, there's an open call for a TAP, or the Technical Advisory Panel. November 16th, the G20 formally launches a pandemic fund. And in the fall through the winter, the governing board meets and establishes working groups to advance decision-making on the fund's priorities, draft and revise a results framework, develop co-financing policies, and move towards launching a first call for proposals. The board met on Monday, so there's progress on that call for proposals that I'm sure we will discuss more. Now and through February, the TAP is announced. The governing board and the TAP review approve documents for that first call. And I believe the first call was launched officially, yes, on Monday at the board meeting. In May, the governing board reset, which essentially the shuffling around of leads and countries who are investing, civil society and co-investor countries will transition from interim, which they are now, to becoming permanent members of the pandemic fund. Next slide. So how has civil society remained engaged? In August of 22, civil society coordinated by PAN, ENASO, CISD, WACI Health, and ACT-A platform host informational sessions between civil society and the founding donors to inform and shape the fund progress. We know that coordinating with civil society will make a more holistic fund and design process. Civil society partners manage the rapid process to recruit and select interim civil society and community board members for the governing board. And in September, civil society board members participated in the first board meeting. In September and through till now, civil society, coordinated by all of these partners, are hosting town hall meetings like this one to engage civil society and communities with representatives on the governing board, launching a Google group to remain coordinated. And in November, we launched civil society and community work teams to support the governing board on 3 areas of work: the results framework, co-financing, and that first call for proposals. Next slide, please. The structure of the fund, there's a governing board. That's the decision-making body of the pandemic fund. It sets the overall work program, makes the funding decisions. The fund is also has a secretariat, which does the administrative duties, including support to the governing board in the delivery of its responsibilities. It's hosted at the World Bank and led by Priya Basu, who's the executive head. There's a financial trustee served by the World Bank, and then the implementing entities to carry out the pandemics fund at the country, regional, and global level, which we'll talk about in the upcoming slides. Next slide, please. So you can see here that the governing board, it's the governing body of the fund. There's 21 voting members with an equal balance between contributing countries, sovereign contributing countries, and sovereign co-investing countries, countries that, thank you, and non-sovereign contributors, including philanthropies, foundations, and the 2 voting seats for the civil society organizations. The Pandemic Fund is chaired by Dr. Basri, former Minister of Finance for Indonesia, and you can see some of the member countries here, a mix of countries from the contributors and co-investors. Next slide, please. The governance is set up as follows. So our civil society representatives, again, those members that went through that iterative process. We have AMREF Health Africa, the board member representing the Global South, and then we have Global Health Council, the civil society member representing the Global North. We also have 2 alternates, One Health Bangladesh and Frontline AIDS UK. We also have our informal network of support teams organized by PAN, CISD, INASO, WAKI Health, and ACT-A, as I mentioned earlier. And then the technical advisory panel, which are a group of 20 experts across pandemic preparedness and response, including One Health, to ensure that the governing board has access to the latest knowledge and advice of civil society groups and critical gaps in PPR. So the chair of that is Mike Ryan of WHO, and the vice chair, Joy St. John of CARICOM. Next, please. So where are we with the funding levels? There's current pledges of 1.6 billion. Not all have been publicly announced, but we know that the gap is great, and 10.5 billion is needed on an annual basis. There's a lot of talk about the long-term fundraising plans, which have not been set yet, but you can see from the graph down below that there's a lot of daylight between the minimum annual goal and the announced pledges. Next slide, please. There's 3 thematic priorities for the pandemic fund to address. The first is strengthening country level pandemic PPR capacity, building regional and global capacity, and supporting technical assistance, analytics, learning, and convening. You can see down below where those priorities are: laboratory strengthening, surveillance, HR and workforce, infection prevention and control, risk communication, community engagement, zoonotic diseases, and medical countermeasure readiness. Next slide. So where are we now? The first call for proposals, was announced at the board meeting, and the applications are expected to be due in early April. There's up to 420 million funding announced. The applications will be country-led with the support of implementing entities. And the 3 priority areas for the first call of proposals is laboratories, surveillance, HR, and workforce. The requirements for the funding include co-investment, co-ownership, multi-stakeholder processes, including civil society. Countries that are eligible to receive funding from IBRD or IDA or regional entities that are specialized technical institutions established by the governments of one or more of these countries. And the implementing entities, include FAO, African Development Bank, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, among others. The extensive list is here. Next slide, please. So how are we going to establish long-term civil society engagement? So we're developing proposals for consideration by the governing board for long-term permanent structure for the pandemic fund. It's based on best practices of other global initiatives. Ideally, it will come with financial support and leadership through a competitive and transparent application process, with the aspiration to connect the global action and dialogue with local grassroots efforts for in-country education, mobilization, and support. Next slide, please. And that brings me up to our Q&A portion. I know that we have a good chunk of time here. We'll be monitoring the chats, but I'm going to turn it back over to my colleague Onesimus to help moderate the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for that. I will just hand over this to our lovely Lizzie to just lead us into the question and answer session. So Lizzie, over to you.
Thank you, Onesimus. Thank you, Ashley, for that. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Pandemic 101. This is the second session. We had the first one early in the morning. Thank you for joining and Happy New Year. So this is the Q&A session. Given community groups and CSOs are usually very engaging, we also recommend that this discussion become more engaging. So feel free to use the icon to raise your hand or type a question. So I'll just keep an eye on that also, and I know the team will also help me look into that. But in the meantime, the whole idea is for the CSOs and community groups to understand the pandemic fund, and that has been the slide that has just been presented by Ashley. But I'll just dive into one quick question that came up during the morning session, which would be good to ask and set off the stage for the Q&A. And that is, how can CSOs apply or benefit from the pandemic fund? That is a question that's always been asked. And I'll let a representative either from PAN to just dive into that discussion. How is the process of application for this fund?
Hi, Lizzie, and hello, everyone, and thank you for being here today. To answer like this specifically, right now, what we know about the process for applying for grants to the pandemic fund is that it will be divided in two steps. First, by the end of this week, we believe February 3rd or early next week, there will be an announcement inviting countries to express interest in submitting a proposal for the pandemic fund, and that will be the first step. And then eventually in March, in a date that is still to be confirmed, the first call for proposals will be launched. It is expected that proposals will be submitted until mid-May, and then funding decisions will be announced in July, also mid-July. It is important to note that the expression of interest is not a prerequisite to apply later in March for funding, but it is definitely something that the World Bank Secretariat would encourage national governments to do, because it will allow them to understand better what's going to be the process, what are the priorities of the first call for proposals. And I think it's also an opportunity for civil society organizations like us to reach out proactively to national governments to ask them about what are their plans if they are considering in applying for funding, and make sure that they start incorporating civil society and communities in the preparation and development of these proposals.
Thank you, Rafa, for that. I've seen a question on the chats from Elie Paravani. I don't know whether you would like to
Yes,
just and
so
ask her your question, or Ellie, if you're still around, feel free to unmute.
Sure, I'm here. Yep, I'm happy to ask my questions. And a third one has just popped up for me as well. Let me just put my video on. So the first question is, do we actually know who's on the technical advisory panel yet? And also, it would be great to hear some more about how PAN and the civil society reps are actually engaging with civil society in advance of the governing board meetings, and just more generally as well, because there were some working groups on 3 priority areas, but I feel like the communication has dried up a little bit, and it might be because the process has moved on slightly beyond that point. But it would be great to get a bit more information about that. And then my third question now is what Raphael was just talking about. Who within government do you suggest that we should be reaching out to? Like which departments, or which civil servants, for example? Like where should we be trying to engage? Thank you.
good. Thank you, Ellie.
That question. Rafa, over to you. I'll let you
Yeah,
run with
thank
it.
you. These are very good questions. And first, about the technical advisory panel, we know that the rest of the members have been selected, and we actually saw yesterday an announcement at the World Bank website that later was removed. We don't know if they are like updating the website or something, but the announcement should be out soon. I haven't personally seen the names, but I know that they have been selected, and the announcement is happening like anytime. I will double check if the link is working again to share with the group just while we're here in the call. Otherwise, I would suggest that if you're interested, you review tomorrow or before the end of the week the fund's website, because the information should be there. Also, on your second question, where we're trying to, how are we working to engage civil society in advance of board meetings? I mean, it has been a challenge because the schedule of the meeting has not been defined. It's something that it has been established more on an ongoing basis. So we have tried to keep up with the monthly civil society town hall meetings, where we are putting all the information that we have on the table. We are also trying to communicate through the listserv that it's based on Google Groups regularly, for everyone to have all that information. As you said, I think we completed the work on the results framework, the co-financing group, and the first call for proposals. And then what happened is that all of this, our feedback was sent to the World Bank Secretariat, and they were responsible for incorporating not only civil society's feedback, but also the one that was coming from the other seats, the ones from philanthropies, the different co-investors and contributors. So we know that these documents are being finalized as part of the first call for proposals. We know that the results framework will be a document that will be also live, that will be like adjusting on a regular basis based on results and learnings from the fund. And the same with the co-financing policy, something that is still not finalized. I think the board needs to approve it. And my guess is that in the coming weeks, there will be probably a lot of work on that, and we will be hearing more about that and sharing that information with the constituency. And on your third question, I think it's challenging to identify like which specific national authorities will engage, but I do believe there is a point of or like a common point across countries. I think we need to, or like if you are interested in a specific country, you first need to identify who's the contact point with the World Bank. Sometimes that point sits like in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or sometimes it's in the Ministry of Finance. It depends on each country, but I think it's important to identify who in national government is the contact with the World Bank, and reach out and ask them like which are the authorities that will be involved. I'm guessing it could be sometimes the Ministry of Health, but probably sometimes would also be important to involve environment or other offices that are relevant for the kind of capabilities that the country is interested in developing.
Great.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Rafa, for that. I hope that was answered earlier. Great.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Perfect. Before we move to Stephen Atasige, I hope, Stephen, you're online to ask your question. Just to emphasize that, yes, the pandemic fund actually has been set up in quite a short time. But the good thing is, as the discussions and progress are ongoing, also Pandemic Action Network is putting out these details outside so that the CSOs and community groups can get a real-time data, so to speak, as we go on. I know initially for the TAP selection committee, the number was 20, but due to gender sensitivity, inclusion, geographical representation and all that, the number was raised to 21, which is a good thing. And as per yesterday's board meeting, they bring different skill sets and expertise that will help with the pandemic fund as we proceed. Stephen Atasige, I don't know whether you're still there. If you can hear me.
Yes, I'm here. I can hear you.
Perfect. Please proceed.
Sure. Thank you very much. I want to know if there are expected commitments to in-country financial investments that will be a criteria for, benefiting from the pandemic treaty, and also what are the accountability plans or strategies for the funds to beneficiary countries.
Thank you for that question. I'll take it back to PAN or Act A representative. I don't know whether Ashley or Rafa, you want to take it over?
I can say something, but of course I will welcome support of other colleagues. Stephen, like if I understood right your question, I understand that, there are no specific amounts committed at this point. The priorities are being defined, and the funding will be allocated based on the merit of the proposals. So it is more about later in March reviewing what are the characteristic, the final criteria of the call for proposals. I'm sure that if we get a chance to see a draft or to comment on that one, is something that we will share with the group. At this stage, I don't know how much information has been already shared with board members and how much of that information is public, but the allocation will be definitely based on the criteria of the first call for proposals. At this point, there's nothing available, and there's no something like allocated to or a priority or a country or a process. Right now, that's still under discussion. And your second question or part of the question on accountability, I think the results framework to start is one of the elements of the accountability of the fund. It's something that will be used to assess if the proposals that were submitted and that were funded actually had the effect that they were expected. So the result framework is that document that is part of the accountability of the fund. And I'm guessing that once that all of these proposals are being implemented, as it is common with other World Bank funds and processes, there will be evaluations that will be constantly monitoring. I would say that from the perspective of civil society, it will be important that these evaluations are also open processes that can receive input from civil society. So I think it's something that, as this fund continue to grow and evolve, will be better defined.
Okay, I don't know whether the team wants to also chime in and add to or deduct from Raphael's sentiments, but there is another question, Raphael, that's actually aligned to the results framework. So Janika is asking if we could dive in more and discuss the results framework. Where are we in the process? What is included in it, or what is notes on the results framework? I don't know whether Ashley wants to chime in.
I was actually going to expand a little on Rafa's previous question, just to say that there is a sense of urgency to get the call of proposals and to have work being implemented on the ground quickly to show that there's support and to gain more momentum around international buy-in to raise more funds for this work. So I realize that things might not be clear and that there's a lot of questions about things like the results framework or what's in the call for proposals. What will this fund? A lot of it is unclear because it's being developed as we speak. It's not something that is very clear while discussions are ongoing at the governing board level.
Perfect, thank you. I've seen a question from Peter Owiti. Peter, are you still on so that you can just unmute yourself?
Yes, I am on. Yes, I'm on, please.
Do proceed.
Yeah, my question is on if there are mandatory, because you said the proposal, the applications will be both the government and civil society. So whether it will be a joint proposal with the civil societies and the government or the states, and if there are mandatory requirements like the government and the civil society must include maybe country dialogues and all and such kind of things.
Thank you, Peter. And I like that question because from the onset, we really need to understand how that structure really works and how CSOs get involved. So I'll let Ashley, I feel like I'll let you have a crack at this one. Sorry.
Sure, of course. No, I'm always happy to. I think that having civil society engaged in developing both call for proposals and also with results framework and the other areas is critical. And we've been working to establish that longer term formal mechanism for continual engagement, because we realize civil society actors realize the importance to have country level perspective, country owned interventions, and assessing the gaps at the national, regional levels. It's imperative to have a longer term mechanism. So we are working on that. There are ways that you can get engaged as well. I think one of the easier ways would be to sign up for the Google group for communications, but PAN, I think, has some resources that we might be able to drop into the chat. I see that Rafa has already posted a link to the Pandemic Fund Action Hub. And that's a very good way to remain engaged in the entire process. Perfect.
Thank you. Because we were going to actually touch on that. Yeah.
Just Lizzie, if I may add something on this point, I want to say that for the board members, the civil society board members, there has been an issue that they have already raised, the importance of having civil society engagement in the development of the proposals and in the implementation of them as well. Of course, we don't know if these criteria will be mandatory or if it will be only desirable, but it's something that is, I think, at the top of the work of the board members and something they are pushing for. And then, of course, from I would say the perspective of the constituency and based on experience, we know that this makes a difference and that this matters for proposals that actually that are effective. So I think it's in our priorities. And as Ashley said, if you keep informed and part of the process, we'll keep you posted about this issue.
Lizzie, I'll also say that I think that the momentum that civil society brings is being noticed. I think when even in the development of the global health security agenda, the civil society kind of arm of that sat on the steering committee, there's good practice here for continued engagement, and that I think is the function of Pandemic Action Network, of Lizzie and Onesimus, of Wacky Health. I think that we're raising the bar of the importance of engagement long term. So that's an ongoing conversation. And Peter, thank you for that excellent question.
Great, thank you. Yes, and of course, CSOs have been in the discussions from the beginning with CISDI and also Work Health Act A. So yes, there is representation. I would like to call upon Sid 9. I like the question that you've typed, but I'd prefer if you actually ask it. I don't know whether Sid you're still on.
Yes, I'm on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie. So it's written in the notes, and it's somewhat linked, might be linked to Peter's question as well. Like in places, I'm thinking of my own country in as an example where, sovereignty is in dispute, or with, there are issues between civil society and the central, authorities. Then how can we, manage that? With a global fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria, there were possibilities to apply for of course, they only allow one proposal per country, but there are possibilities to come up with civil society and other partners to just manage issues along the border, which is really key in this kind of managing pandemic across countries and across borders. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sid. That's actually a very good question. When we talk about cross-border issues, I'll leave it to Ashley or Rafa to actually jump on that one. Before I call upon Alberto, I like Alberto's question, which will direct to Onesimus after Alberto asks.
Rafa, do you want to take this one?
I mean, I would lie if I have like a specific information on these kind of cases. I know that we are looking at examples from other models like the Global Fund, who provide like a reference on how civil society engagement should happen during the development of the proposals, but I do not have a specific information on these kind of cases.
I would think that given the discussions, given that we have our interim and alternate board members from countries that face similar issues with cross-border migration, that these issues are being taken into account, but I don't have any more information on that. But I do think that your point, Sid, is very well taken as something that's a matter of eligibility for those countries in conflict or fragile settings.
Thank you for that. I just would like to raise the issue so that it's noticed and are like not off the table. Thank you.
Sure. And I think I'll just let Pandemic Action Network also take note of that particular question so that we can escalate it after this meeting. Alberto, Colorado, if you're on, please just unmute and ask your question.
Oh, he says that he's here, but it's too early in California and he can't talk.
Oh dear, no worries. You typed it, so I'll just ask, could you please define community engagement? For me, our communities need social support in case of emergencies like COVID-19 pandemic. Gracias. I'll let Ian also dive into that. Onesimus, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Alberto, when we are talking about community engagement, is ensuring that the voice of communities is actually at the center of every action and direct the response. That's basically what community engagement actually in a nutshell. Actually, I call it community engagement 101. So that in any perspective, when we are talking about governance, we actually need communities' voices presence at a governance stage. When we are talking about planning, implementation, and ensuring that service access is at its prime, we expect communities to actually be at the center of these actions. So it is basically not speaking for, but allowing communities to be able to express what actually the community felt needs are that directs the actions that actually needs to be taken. And this has to be felt across board, from the actual service access to the governance level where decisions are actually made. Briefly, probably that's how I could put it in a nutshell.
Great, thank you, Onesimus, for that. And the fact that we mentioned earlier on, we already have also civil society representation during the ongoing discussions on the pandemic fund is also one key area of actually in making sure that we do not leave CSOs and community groups out of these crucial discussions. We'll dive into the next question, and we're talking about co-investment, co-ownership. What does this mean? Kenneth, are you still on for you to ask your question?
Oh,
Kenneth,
yes, and thank you.
please proceed.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Please proceed.
Hello?
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Okay. Yes, great, thanks. So my question was there's a slide that has where we are and the call for proposals. I don't remember the slide number, but I was wondering on what they meant by on those bullet points, the second and last bullets on priorities. I see laboratory surveillance and HR. If you could speak more to that, if what sort of community interventions are related to that, but also requirements for funding where they say it must be, I don't know whether it's a must or co-investment or ownership or evidence-based multi-stakeholder, including civil society. I needed some more clarity on that. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Kenneth, for that question. In terms of the financial structure and all that, I'll let Ashley run with that particular question. Ashley, over to you.
Well, we know that for this specific call for proposals, there is a limit of up to 420 million for this one, given that percentage of the overall total raised. We know that raising funding to actually meet the needs globally is a challenge. We're continuing to work within the US, the G7, G20 globally, as well as with other philanthropic organizations and civil society organizations, of which one is donated funding so far, and 2 philanthropic organizations. But it's a continued challenge to actually raise the funds needed to actually close the gaps on the ground. As you said, the first call for proposals, which is addressing 3 priorities or high impact, hopefully with a high reward that will be noticeably improved some of those critical gaps. I think that goes to why those 3 areas were chosen: increased surveillance, laboratory strengthening capacity, HR, and workforce. But I hear your question quite loudly. I hope that if Rafa or anyone else wants to join in for further clarity.
I mean, I think Ashley was very much on point.
Okay.
More of this information will be available in the coming weeks as we know more about the first call for proposals.
Perfect. And now that you've just mentioned the keyword I was looking for, more information, maybe Rafa, you can get the team to type the email address that the team can use for them to register so that they get the newsletters that are constantly sent out by Pandemic Action Network, just to keep up with what is going on as far as the Pandemic Fund is concerned. I'll call upon Catherine Otieno. If you're on, Catherine, please just ask your question. Catherine, I'm not so sure if you're still there.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi, I'm having issues with my connection.
No worries. I can read out the question.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So basically, I wanted to find out whether the local actors will also be involved during the proposal development process, or whether this is going to be like top level engagement, being that we have the implementers being like the high end, like UNICEF, World Health Organization, and so forth. So how will we be part of this process? Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And that's a super crucial question. I mean, the idea is to see and get to learn where CSOs and communities kind of, come in and the engagement. So Ashley.
Well, we're hoping to bake in civil society organizations and the civil society perspective really at every level of this process, including the technical advisory committee and those working groups for things like the results framework and call for proposals. as well as kind of the theory of change. I think one way that local organizations can become involved, as Lizzie was rightfully saying, is one, to join organizations like the Pandemic Action Network, which serves as a hub for information, and also to be able to feed up to our interim and hopefully permanent board members so that they can raise these issues. It's been a matter of becoming more engaged. I think that this is a wonderful platform and network that can bring that country level or regional level perspective on what's actually needed to the governing board, those countries and also organizations. The other way that I believe we can become more engaged and more comprehensive, holistic as a society is also to engage, if you can, those, if your country of origin happens to be on the governing board, they most likely will have, hopefully will have a way to engage your particular representatives like we do in the US for our leads there. So those are two suggestions, and Rafa has also put an email address in the chat to be included. Rafa, am I missing anything?
Okay, perfect. So we can carry on. And I also wanted Onesimus to chime in on this because we're looking at CSOs and local actors' involvement in us being a regional CSO body. And you've been part of the discussions from the onset. It will be good to also actually hear from you, from your experience, and how engaged CSOs are in these whole discussions.
Yeah, I think CSOs have actually been part of this conversation at different levels. And you see, when we are actually talking about CSOs having the opportunity to be represented at the governance level, that is actually the highest level unto which CSOs can actually be represented. And if you look at how we've really been managing this as a span to ensure that communities are actually, we are getting the right representatives to actually sit at the highest decision-making level, then this is a show of the willingness that communities should actually be involved at all levels. And I think we might have done better, but we can do more. That yes, discussions and decisions that have actually been taking place have been shared across CSO networks, but I think we need to do much more better to ensure that we broaden the net of CSO coverage so that the conversations that are actually happening reach more CSO groups out there than what we are reaching right now. But I think there is a very very better goodwill to ensure that CSOs are actually carried through from all levels up to the highest level of decision making. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for that comment, Onesimus. Of course, there is more that we can do, but what I like, as I initially mentioned, was the pandemic fund has, it's been short of a time for it to be set up. And the good thing is the transparency as things unfold, everybody's on the loop. CSOs has been engaged from the beginning. So that's a good start. Maziko Matemba, if you're online, do you mind just unmuting and asking your question?
Thank you so much, Lizzie and colleagues on the call. I'm Maziko Matemba from Malawi. My question could be, I know most of the times when we are engaging in this global initiative, I like the initiative, the pandemic initiative, but we found the readiness by countries. For example, we found maybe the countries, the certain information they're not sharing, but have been part and parcel to the pandemic network. How could this network supports countries in terms of readiness or information which maybe has been provided at the global level, where at country level maybe most organizations might not know, because for one to get involved, it means you have the information. So government might have certain information, which is more credible and more advanced in terms of how they are prepared themselves to part of these processes. How do the network, the civil society and communities be able to find out that information and share with colleagues within countries so that we move together with the government authorities, but also civil society? Because yes, we can apply for the funds, but you cannot implement in absence of information which has already been done by certain stakeholders, and government being key in these issues. I think we need to know in advance so that we can move together. I don't know whether that has been explored as we move on. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Maziko.
I'm from Malawi.
Transparency, thank you. Transparency, getting information, in good time and knowing who's to communicate this information is also crucial. So which is part of Pandemic Action Network's process, where we have town halls and we have emails and newsletters that are being sent out just as information comes in. But I'll let Rafi actually just pick up on that bit.
I mean, I don't know if Ashley or another colleague could actually.
I mean,
this.
Russell, I think, as Lizzie has said, that having the ability so that this is not just seen as a high income donor country initiative by having, as Lizzie said, these town halls across a variety of time zones. So whichever is more convenient, depending on where you happen to be at any given time. We are committed, and Pandemic Action Network, I think, is committed to continuing these discussions and serving as a resource for you, so that you have this ability, at the very least, to have the transparency of information. There's also a lot of international discussions going on at WHO around things that might touch the pandemic fund, including a pandemic accord or pandemic treaty. It's a tremendous amount of information that's currently circulating. So I would urge you as well to sign up and to remain engaged. And I think that the Pandemic Action Network and others are open to hearing suggestions about how better to engage across a range of countries and a range of time zones, quite frankly.
Yeah, great. And that's why we're having such kind of discussions on Pandemic Fund 101, just to kind of have a feel of what the feedback is from CSOs and community groups, so that they get involved, and we also take their input as we go. Jenny Desmond, I know you're looking at traditional collaboration. Yes, sorry, Onesmus, you can carry on.
Lizzie.
Oh,
Nana
hi,
Hashem here.
Nasher.
Sorry, I had my
Yes,
hand up.
my apologies. You sound like Onesmus. My apologies. Yes, please chime in.
Yeah, I'm Nahashan. I work with the Pandemic Action Network, Africa region. And I think those questions and the conversations have been very helpful. And I'm really, in addition to what Rafa explained earlier, I think engagement at the country level, we can have CSO reps in the board, we can have the town halls, but that won't really be enough to fix CSO participation in the proposal development process at the country level. It takes all of us to, really organize and mobilize and organize ourselves at the country level, make the right contacts with our respective governments so that we are able to plug ourselves into the in-country processes. I think the network, Pandemic Action Network, and other partners have done a tremendous job. They can still, make sure that we get the right information and that we have the awareness of the process. But the actual country level engagement, I think that's where we now need to pull together as civil society actors and find ways that work within our respective contexts, given the different governance challenges. Some of them have been alluded to by previous speakers. So my point in a nutshell is that we have a role to mobilize and organize ourselves at the country level and engage with our respective governments in a way that makes sense as we get the relevant information from the network and other partners. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Nash. Thank you for those comments. It just reminded me that, yes, with the current pandemic, what governments and private sector also realized is you need to engage the communities and who best to have those discussions with. And that means when it comes to pandemic preparedness and even the pandemic fund processes, they have seen the crucial role that civil societies and community groups play. And that's why this kind of discussions are being held. Thank you, Nashan, for that comment. I'll just call upon Janie Desmond. If you're still online, you can just unmute yourself.
Yep, I'm here. How are you?
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, my question, and I'm sorry I joined late, so perhaps this was discussed and I missed the first half. I lost track of time, so I apologize. But I know there was some question about, national versus regional level funding, and we have a pretty cohesive collaboration with our West Africa regional teams and One Health we have a One Health coordination platform in Liberia, but could be used as this, this springboard for doing some regional work and transboundary work. So I wonder how that might work when applying for funds, or is it better for just, to apply at the national level and then different countries are applying and then we try and coordinate efforts?
Perfect. Thank you for that question, because it needs to actually also be clear whether one can actually do it through a national angle or there's a regional perspective into it. Ashley, any thoughts?
I don't have any thoughts. I think that it's a good question. I think that we need more clarification about what entities can receive funding and how funding is going to flow. There's been a lot of discussion around that. I'm not clear, but Jenny, I'm interested to hear more about your One Health platform. And I know that we did have colleagues on. I think if Neil Vora is still on as well, that's passionate about the incorporation of One Health into pandemic preparedness. And there's other ways as well to help raise awareness of this. Rafa, do you have any more information on that and the recipient?
I mean, also, I think this is a very important point, understanding also the nature of pandemics they don't respect borders, that the issues that we have to address actually are both national and regional. And I think it's a point that we have to stress as the fund continue growing and its first call for proposals approach. I don't have more information to add on that. I would say also that probably implementing agencies may have a role to play on that. For example, the regional banks that probably are going to be working with different countries might be in a position to push forward that kind of proposals. So I would also place emphasis on the role that some implementing agencies may have to make sure that there is coordination for proposals to have more regional impact.
Great, thank you, Rafa. And thank you for highlighting that, because it looks like when it comes to cross-border, then we need to get some more insight on that, and we've taken note and we'll get more feedback on that. So Peter, looks like you're my last question on the chat. I don't know whether anybody else has a question. Feel free to raise your hand. But Peter Owiti, please, if you can unmute and ask the last question you've just typed in.
Yeah, thank you once again. The issue of the country's felt needs, like the pandemic is very dynamic. We have in some countries high-level infection, and they might feel that providing therapeutics to the population would be a priority other than the laboratories or the surveillance or the health workforce. So how is every country allowed to maneuver outside the provisions, or it's just that you must abide by those the proposal requirements?
Thank you, Peter, for that. Also, just to see how flexible this whole process is going to be. Ashley, Rafa, how strict are the rules in terms of application for the funding, or how flexible are they?
I mean, we still don't know what exactly the content of the first call for proposals, and I think it's important that to stay informed, and it's something that we will try to share more information as soon as we have it. I would say that it's important also to remember that the Pandemic Fund is looking to strengthen capabilities for pandemic prevention and preparedness, and of course also response. It's not intended to address outbreaks or specific health emergencies at this point. It's more for the long term. And I would say that the priorities that will be included will be fairly comprehensive, because we're just in the middle of a pandemic, we know the lessons, we know that's what has to be done. So I would say that, I mean, all countries are very likely to find points in common with the priorities. And I think that there will be a lot of match between what countries need and what it will come up from the first call for proposals.
Okay, perfect. I'm not seeing any other question. Looks like Peter's was the last one.
Jamie has her hand
okay,
raised.
Hi, thanks everyone. Great conversation. And I didn't really have a question, but just a comment to layer in. Raphael, building on what you've just said and a few of the comments, you know, I think as we watch this first tranche of funding call come out, and as we look at the news about the TAP, one of the things I'm personally interested to be tracking is how much are regional bodies, not just the regional banks, but, you know, Africa CDC, other regional stakeholders going to have a seat at the decision-making table. I think that's something that we all as CSOs need to be really carefully watching. And then thinking about what are the other adjacent bodies that we need to be advocating to and engaging with to make sure that these priorities for investment are elevated, not just with the financing folks, but with the stakeholders that are informing the financing folks. And, you know, from where we sit, we also see the global health security agenda as a really important vehicle for connecting dots, simply because we know that it's a mostly country-led initiative, and that there's places there within that framework that you can actually have an apples to apples conversation across countries or across regions to say, okay, you know, every country is going to ask for more money for filling capacity gaps. But if we try to then aggregate what those needs are and perhaps slice and dice the data to make the evidence case stronger, can we do that at a regional level? And I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation we should all watch play out. So thinking about how do we engage regional bodies? How do we engage other multilateral bodies that we think could be important catalysts to informing how the PAN fund, the financiers actually disperse the money? Over.
Perfect. Thank you. I like the fact that you actually brought that up, because as per yesterday's board meeting, Africa CDC was actually one of the observers. So yes, it is key to have those important body vehicles that will actually, who need to be in those discussions and in those rooms. I don't know whether there's any other hand that has been raised, Rafa, if you can see from my end, I'm not so sure.
I don't see other hands raised.
Okay. Perfect, great. So I think that was the last question. I'm not too sure if there's anybody else who has a burning question. Please do raise your hand. If not, we will just proceed to the slides, and I'll hand over to Onesimus. Over to you to conclude the session and carry on. Onesimus, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. I was actually struggling to unmute myself. So basically, the last slide that we really want to present to all of us is how we can actually stay engaged in this whole process. There are quite a number of engagement sessions that are upcoming. Like our next town hall meeting will be on the 16th of February 2022, and this will be between 8:30 to 9:30 Jakarta time, or 4:30 to 5:30 East African Nairobi time, or between 2:30 to 3:30 CET Geneva, or between 8:30 and 9:30 ET New York. So watch out for this so that you can get to learn more about what's actually happening in the pandemic circles, the governance section. I mean, we get feedbacks from our board members on what's basically is happening there. And then we're going to be having the civil society and community constituency mailing list, where you can actually register so that you do not miss any information, like we have talked about. Yes, we are giving a lot of feedback. I mean, there's quite a lot of communication that's going along, but not have we reached all, or not everybody's actually really getting this information, and it's good for all of us to actually register in this mailing list, so that people can actually be able to get first-hand information. And even when we have colleagues who are probably not in this call, but you can actually reach out to them, it's good for them to actually register in this mailing list. And also, you can actually access quite a lot of information from the Pandemic Fund website. There's quite a lot of information actually being shared there at the Pandemic Fund website, which is quite relevant to keep us abreast of what actually is happening, what are the new events, new issues that are actually happening that we actually really need to know. And of course, the Pandemic Fund Action Hub website also provides quite a lot of relevant and significant information that we really need to know. So I think this is basically what can actually really help us to keep engaged, keep the engagement process and getting to learn what's happening and how can we get involved in the different spaces that are actually available and sessions that are upcoming, so that we can all move together. So allow me to just say thank you very much for really having been part of this, and thank you for your patience and engaging very constructively during this presentation. We're really looking forward to still having you in other engagements and other sessions that we'll be organizing in future, so that we can actually really make this new fund really work for us. I think the whole idea is really for this fund to work for us in whatever formation that it shall come, so that by the end of the day, we see that communities really benefit. So thank you very much, colleagues.
Onesimus, sorry, before you hang up, yes, the next town hall is actually February 16th, 2023.
Yeah,
we're still oh yeah, so just to clarify that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's 2023. So actually over to you, Liz. You are my co-moderator to just close the session.
Perfect. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We always save the best for the last. So appreciate you for creating time and joining us, and looking forward to just engaging with CSOs and community groups. We've seen the work that needs to be done, and we cannot do it without CSOs and community groups. So have a great afternoon, a great morning, wherever you are, and see you soon during the town hall meeting. Thank you.